Tyler.
Oh, you gotta love regulations. Love them or you hate them, right? You got to get through them. So we got a series of other regulations to get through. I might go through these a little quick. They're going to be available for review here as well. They'll be available for review in Top Hat, and then I'm going to see about using Teams if the technology is working, having a recorded review as well for you through Teams. So, and I'll get that information sent out to you a little bit later today. Definitely other regulations that a pilot needs to understand. You got a discussion board for any questions you might have. You want to avoid at all costs the motor vehicle offense. This is driving while intoxicated, under the influence, or impaired. If convicted in a court of law, right? If convicted from a court of law, you have to report on each aviation medical application for the rest of your career, right? That's every time, right? The FAA Civil Aviation Security Division gets a one-time notification within 60 days. This is an FAA test question. The only way I remember this one is the word security. Just telling you how I remember it. Right? They're going to list you several options of who to report to within 60 days. It's the security division. Second in command. There are aircraft that are rated for more than one crew member. Now keep in mind, we are not talking about required safety pilot or instrument flying. We're talking about an aircraft that was certified with 2 or more crew members. So you got to be at least a private pilot. If you're going to fly into the clouds, you have to be instrument rated. If the aircraft requires a type rating, you have to be type rated. You have to become familiar with specific information about your aircraft. And you have to have some aircraft flying time, 3 takeoffs and landings, engine out procedures, and crew resource management. You satisfy those requirements, then your aircraft that requires more than one crew member, you can be second in command on it. Flight reviews. Every pilot needs a flight review or the equivalent of a flight review. So every 24 calendar months, minimum of 1 hour of ground discussion or 1 hour of flight training. So anybody who's taken a long time to work on their instrument rating, it's been more than 24 calendar months, then you're getting a flight review. Yeah. Do you have a question there?
Or for ground instruction and 1 hour flight training?
Say again now?
Is that, you said or 1 hour flight training?
No, it's an and. Yep, these are just minimums as well. It could be longer if you've been out of flying for a while. You might need more than 1 hour time. Of course, if you get a complete an FAA check ride, that's used in lieu of the flight review, or complete the WINGS program as well. Your recent flight experience in order to carry passengers is a 90-day period. During daytime, it's 3 takeoffs and landings of any type. However, tail dragger is full stop. When we get to nighttime, we do have that 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise limitation to accomplish these, and they must be full stop. If you move your permanent address, you got to notify the FAA within 30 days, or you may not act as pilot command. So while you're a college student, if you have the ability to keep your home address as your permanent address, you don't have to notify the FAA. But if your permanent address is a college address, then you are going to have to change it a lot. You may tow gliders. You may get compensated to do it as a commercial pilot. You do have to have 100 hours of pilot command time in order to do it. Now, these are FAA test questions here. We're concentrating on them. There's a question that talks about needing a logbook endorsement of ground and flight training. Then your recent experience is every 24 calendar months, where you can do 3 actual or simulated glider tows with a qualified glider pilot. Okay. If you ever see the word supervised, that means a flight instructor. And notice that the regulation here does not state you need a flight instructor. You just need a qualified glider pilot. So I'll just put there, not supervised. Again, supervised means flight instructor. Student pilots can operate in some Class B airspace areas. Not everyone, but some. Okay? The ones that do allow student pilots, that student pilot must be trained at that specific Class Bravo airport and have a logbook endorsement stating that they've been trained to fly there. Now we'll go through this list later in Part 91, but Appendix D, Section 4 does list 12 airports that do not allow student pilots to operate. So, for example, Chicago O'Hare is on the list where there's no solo student pilots allowed, but Detroit Metro does allow them. Commercial pilot without an instrument rating has a restriction, a limitation put right on their pilot certificate. Make note of this for your assignment, right? The carriage of people for hire during the daytime beyond 50 nautical miles or at night is prohibited. That comes right out of the regulation in Part 61 under commercial pilot limitations. That exact verbiage is on the pilot certificate if you're not instrument rated. Keep that in mind when you work on the assignment B1 on certificates. Well, very specific. We're talking about for hire operations here. A commercial pilot can take people up at night, right? But when it comes to taking up people for hire at night, that is prohibited if they're not instrument rated. Well, that was a quick section. All right, any questions right now? All right, we're going to get into our last section, talking about commercial pilot operations. It is operating for compensation or hire. This is where you really need to understand what can you legally do for carrying people and cargo from point A to point B? And how do you identify an illegal operation? Remember, the FAA does not like illegal air taxi operations, and they will fine you in the neighborhood of $10,000 per occurrence, and they will suspend your certificate for a minimum of 6 months. They don't like it, so they do have harsh penalties. You may have seen the extra credit opportunity for the Hinman violation. So if you've been reading through that one, it's like a $3.2 million fine against the Hinman Group. They're allegedly doing an air taxi operation. So it's still a good read if you haven't found that opportunity yet. Let's talk about compensation and hire. We have a discussion board here for your questions. Some terms that help you understand being a commercial pilot working for hire and compensation. First term is called common purpose. It's not defined in the regulations anywhere, but as you've done your pre-class reading, there were several NTSB case law summaries that talked about common purpose. That's where a pilot and passenger share a reason to fly in the first place. That does equate to private pilot privileges. A private pilot may take a passenger from point A to point B as long as there's common purpose. If the pilot is setting the destination, there's common purpose going on. If a passenger would come up to a private pilot and tell them where to fly them to, that's not common purpose. That's an illegal air taxi operation. An advisory circular about truth in leasing. Very important read. Very, very important. If you've not read that advisory circular, you have to go read it. If you've already read it, reread it. It's an incredibly rich advisory circular on understanding what you can and can't do on commercial operations. From that, we get the term wet lease, where we lease the aircraft with a crew member, as opposed to the dry lease, which is just the aircraft itself being leased, no crew members. Understanding the difference of these two helps us understand who has operational control of the aircraft. And our next term defines operational control: the person or entity who has the authority for deciding when a flight is initiated, which means scheduled, and conducting the flight. You have to understand this is not pilot and command authority going on right here. This is, for example, the boss calling you up, telling you, we're going to have a flight to San Diego. I want to leave Friday morning at 8 a.m. That's operational control. Now it's up to you as the pilot command to organize everything that needs to be done for that flight, making sure the aircraft's ready, all the inspections have been done, it's fueled. It's up to you, but it's the boss who called you up earlier in the week and said, Friday morning, 8 o'clock, departure for San Diego. Operational control. Boss calls you at 7 a.m. Friday morning, flight's canceled. That's operational control. Or you take the other example. Boss shows up for the 8 o'clock departure. Thunderstorms in the area. You tell the boss, we're going to delay. That's pilot command authority. That's not operational control. Okay? You have to separate those two out. They are completely different. You've probably watched movies where they're flying over the Atlantic somewhere, and the big boss in the back picks up the phone, calls up the flight crew and said, let's change your destination, go to Athens now. That's operational control. Now it's up to the pilot to be the pilot command to get there. Other terms, air carrier. Very basic term here, to engage in air transportation. Commercial operator. Engaging in air commerce for compensation or hire. A corporate operator. That's a pilot employee who flies company aircraft. So over in Kalamazoo, we have Stryker Medical. They have corporate aircraft. They have employees who are pilots. Those are corporate pilot employees. And then the National Business Aircraft Association has an agreement with the FAA called the Small Aircraft Exemption, which allows an aircraft to operate under FAR Part 91.501, which is the operation of large turbine aircraft. So some of these corporations have aircraft that are big enough that they have their own set of rules. So very important terms to understand here. Simple question, what can you do as a commercial pilot? And the answer, you can be hired to fly somebody else's airplane. That's our framework that we're going to start with. Stryker Medical calls you up and says, hey, we want you to be one of our corporate pilots. Great, you're going to fly Stryker's airplane. A lawyer calls you up. Hey, I've got an airplane. We need to get to our client up north. I want to hire you to do that. Okay, you're flying somebody else's airplane. That's good. You can do something like that. Let's look at some of the ways you can be hired and compensated. There's three broad categories here. In the red, we have what we call common carriage. We'll talk about these specifically, all right, help you understand them better. In the orange, we have operations not involving common carriage. This goes by a variety of different names that we'll talk about. And then in the green, we have Part 91 operations and carriage. So we'll break these three areas down. Right. But in general, you can operate in one of these three broad categories. Talk about the easy one here, Part 91 operations. We do have to be aware that FAR Part 119 is a set of rules that's applicable to commercial operators. In 119.1, it does list exemptions stating that these operations that we see here do not have to abide by the rules in Part 119. So this list here is our basis of what we can do, especially when you graduate from the program here. Straight away, you can become a flight instructor and do student instruction. Or you can go wander away to some localities that are very scenic and offer nonstop sightseeing flights within 25 miles of the airport. It's also possible for you to get a job where you will fly an airplane from an airport to a customer a long distance away. It's called a ferry flight. Or you might be in some sort of commercial operation and you need to train up another pilot that was just hired. There's aerial work. Think about firefighting. Think about crop dusting. Those are aerial applications. Fish spotting would be another example. Parachute operations. Part 133 ops. Emergency mail service. Part 91.321 operations, which is the carriage of candidates in an election. And small unmanned aerial systems operating under Part 107. So all those things you can do and get hired and compensated to do. You can also be a corporate pilot. You can get hired by a business to fly the business's own airplane. You can also operate under 91 Subpart F, which is large turbine aircraft, or the NBAA exemption, or take part in Part 91 fractional ownership, which generally stays up to 8 owners of an aircraft. You can share time in it. Okay. Those are the easy ones. And the thing to remember is operations here are conducted without any additional certificates. So these are legal to do straight away for you. Okay. The next bit to help you understand a little bit better is further understanding corporate aviation. As a corporate pilot, you fly aircraft that's owned by the company or the firm, or even an individual person can hire you to fly their own airplane. Remember what we said in the beginning, you can be hired to fly somebody else's airplane. I might even add the term here, contract pilot, because you can be hired under contract. You know, corporate pilot might be an employee position, but sometimes they hire pilots for a short period of time as needed, under contract. But you're transporting persons or cargo that's associated with that company, with that firm, with that individual person. And you're going to other places to conduct company business or the individual person's personal business. Somebody won the lotto, they bought an airplane, they hired you to be their personal pilot. Right. If it's a corporate pilot, that pilot is an employee of the company. Or you're a contract pilot hired by the company or an individual. Subpart F, large turbine aircraft, you can share certain expenses. And if you read through the Hinman violation, this is where they centered their investigation on violation of 91.501. NBAA exemption, small aircraft that are not large and turbine powered can share with the same cost sharing benefits. Of course, Subpart K allows the sharing of certain expenses under a fractional program. So we're not going to dive any deeper into those areas, but you should be at least familiar with them. Now let's hit up what we call common carriage. When we say common carriage, we mean it's common to anybody who can afford the cost of the ticket. So common carriage, we always associate the term holding out. You are holding out your services as a pilot. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you absolutely are having to abide by 119, Part 119, which is operations for or regulations for commercial operators. But most notably, you're going to be operating under Part 121 as a scheduled airline, or Part 135 as an air taxi on-demand operator. Here's the big thing, though, about common carriage. It requires an air carrier certificate. This is issued by the FAA to the entity. not to a person, not to a pilot, but to the entity, to the business. So the business has to have this air carrier certificate to conduct these operations. Think about scheduled airlines. We think about Southwest Airlines as an example. They are an air carrier. Somewhere in their corporate headquarters, they have an air carrier certificate issued by the FAA. FedEx would be another example of a scheduled carrier. They're carrying packages. The other one is air taxiing on-demand operations. So these are operators who don't have a set schedule, but you could just walk in to their place and say, I want you to take me and my family down to Florida tomorrow. And you can pay the cost for it. And they take you down there whatever time you want to go. Again, it requires an air carrier certificate for that. We define common carriage as a willingness to furnish air transportation to any person who wants it. We're talking about the general public. And it's the name common. That when the FAA investigates that someone's engaged in common carriage, they determine is there a willingness to transport persons or property from place to place for compensation. If they find any of these elements, then they will determine that this is a common carriage operation. And if you don't have an air carrier certificate, you're in a lot of trouble. The term holding out is always associated with common carriage, holding out your services to the public, such as you are advertising, I am a commercial pilot, I will fly you from point A to point B. That's advertising. Even if you don't verbally advertise, if you print up some flyers or an electronic notification or radio announcement, that's advertising. If you get someone to be an agent for you to arrange these trips, you are holding out your services to the public. Or if you just have that reputation that anybody that comes to you, you'll take them wherever they want to go. That is common carriage. Remember, when the passenger sets the destination, there's no common purpose, so you can't think about using the third-class privileges. Here's an example of what that air carrier certificate looks like. So no person, this is right in 119.5, no person may operate as that direct air carrier or commercial operator without an appropriate certificate. So the FAA makes this a very big deal for illegal air taxi operations. We'll be seeing more of that in the future there. So how do we go about understanding what we can and can't do? Well, let me hit real quick here on non-common carriage. Non-common carriage means I'm not going to hold out to the public, but maybe just select groups within the public. So it could be called private carriage. It could be called transporting people and cargo without compensation or hire. It could be called non-common carriage. There's different names it can go by. Big deal is these are still requiring a commercial operating certificate. So your entity still has to have a certificate from the FAA that says you can operate as a commercial operator. So non-common carriage, you are providing the airplane to conduct business. That's a big difference here. You are providing the airplane. So if you're providing an airplane, you've got to have an air carrier or commercial operation certificate. Carriage for hire for one or select few customers. Involves a contract, whether it's verbal or written, and is implied on a long-term basis. But you are operating under 135 or possibly FAR 125 for a large aircraft. And just note about compensation as well. Compensation is something given or received as an equivalent for services, death, loss, injury. It could be money, that's the obvious one, but anything that's related to money, reduced insurance costs, getting logbook hours that you didn't pay for, bartering with another company, that all involves money, and the FAA will look at that as compensation. All right, we got just a few more minutes here, so let's get my slide mixed up here. There we go. So we have a flow chart to really help you understand whether or not an operation is a for-hire or common carriage or private carriage or Part 91 operation here. The first question we ask is the flight for hire up here? If it's not a for hire flight, then do we have common purpose? Did the pilot set the destination? If yes, then you've got private pilot privileges that you can use. Pro rata is allowed with it. If the flight is for hire, then we just ask some questions like, hey, are we operating within a lease agreement? If we are in the lease agreement, we have to determine who has operational control. Who provides the aircrew? Who maintains the aircraft? Who manages the flight details? That is, who gets the crew car? Who pays for fuel? Is there catering involved? Overnight arrangements for the crew in a hotel, maybe. Okay. If the lessor has any one of those, then they are operating as a private carriage operation. They got to have a certificate for it. If the lessee provides the crew, maintains the aircraft, manages the flight details, then that's a Part 91 operation right there. Okay, if it's not within a lease agreement, is it within 119.1 exemptions that were listed? Student instruction, air tour, parachute operations, etc. Is it under a fractional ownership program? Or is it a corporate operation, contract pilot operation? If none of those apply, then we come down to, is the pilot soliciting? Is the pilot offering their service? Or is the pilot providing the aircraft? Then that makes the flight as a common carriage flight. All right, so I've got a few questions I normally ask on that. I'm going to just make those available through Top Hat for you with some explanations as well. We're coming up to the end of our time. So just a reminder, Exam A, it will be opened up here momentarily, and you'll have until 11:59 tonight to get it done. You will need camera enabled on your computer. If you have some sort of scheduling difficulty, just work with me. If you miss class or a portion of class, I'll get some instructions out to you for makeup. Hopefully Teams is recording everything here, and we'll have this available for review as well as for makeup. Our group activity is called the ADM game, or no, Airman game, that will be made available on Top Hat as well for you. That's an extra credit opportunity, by the way. So work in groups on that if you want, or by yourself. Does not matter. Right. Other than that, thank you for being flexible with the unusual parking lot on I-94 today. You are all set, good to go. We'll catch you later.